Many people across the Western world are watching with alarm the rise of the far right. It seems that it's not only America that has taken a huge lurch to the extreme right, epitomized by Trump supporter Elon Musk's now infamous Nazi salute at Trump's inauguration. Countries like Hungary, Italy, Finland, Slovakia, Croatia, Austria, the Czech Republic and Germany are also becoming part of a relentless march towards fascism. More worrying for Scotland, which has traditionally been left of centre politically and held values such as the common good, is what this could all mean for us here. In this film, we reveal some of the worst and best-case scenarios for Scotland in an increasingly fascist-run Western world and ask, can we escape from the effects of the far right? If you are new to the channel, subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of more great content from the Scotland channel. Trump's second term in the White House may confound some, especially after his insurrection attempt, which took place on January 6, 2021, 2 months after Trump's narrow defeat to the Democrats led by Joe Biden in 2020. A mob of thousands of Trump's supporters, most of them armed, attacked the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., leading to the deaths of 4 police officers and 1 protester. According to the bipartisan House Select Committee that investigated the events of that day, the attack was the culmination of a 7-part plan by Trump to overturn the election result. Coupled with a slew of legal cases against Trump, including inappropriate behavior and assault, cases relating to his business dealings, and a lawsuit for inciting violence at a 2016 campaign rally, in 2024, Trump became the first former U.S. president to be convicted of felony crimes after a New York jury found him guilty of all 34 charges in a scheme to illegally influence the 2016 election through a hush money payment to a porn actress who said the two had intercourse. The sentencing was deferred indefinitely following his 2024 election victory, with many people asking, how is it possible for a convicted felon to become the U.S. president? No matter how many lies he tells or how extreme his policies are, policies such as threatening to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal by military force and to make Canada the 51st state of the U.S., his supporters just don't seem to care that their president is a dangerous, unpredictable, and out-of-control narcissist who has even hinted at remaining in office beyond his elected term in what many are saying is already a coup. The really troubling thing is that Trump is doing many of the things Adolf Hitler did before taking complete control of Germany in the 1930s and turning the country into a dictatorship, which went on to commit genocide and spark the Second World War. So, how will this lurch to the far right across the Western world impact Scotland? Well, with England apparently hell-bent on following America's lead in everything, the man widely tipped to be the next UK Prime Minister in 2029, Trump supporter Nigel Farage, will almost certainly win enough seats in England to take over as UK Prime Minister, and given that Scotland is effectively an annexed territory, that does not bode well for anyone living here. Farage remains deeply unpopular in Scotland, and he knows it. Worse still, because of the way unionist politicians designed the Scottish voting system to ensure the SNP would never win a majority in the new UK-controlled Scottish Parliament, the second, or list vote system, will almost certainly allow Farage's party Reform UK, which is oddly a registered business, not a political party, to fill the void left by the deeply unpopular Tories, who also mostly got in through the back door on second or list votes for regional seats rather than constituency ones. It has to be said at this point, it was a shock to the London ruling classes when, in 2011, then First Minister, the late Alex Salmond, confounded them when the SNP won a Democratic majority in a system which was designed not to deliver democratic outcomes, a system deliberately skewed by second votes which ensure unionists are shoehorned into seats they haven't actually won. In the 2021 Scottish parliamentary election, the Tories won just 5 constituency seats, the Lib Dems 4 and Labour 2, while the SNP won 62 constituency seats. But the Tories picked up 26 extra regional seats on the list vote, Labour 20 extra seats, the Greens 8, and the SNP 2, and the Tories were still in power at UK level, even though Scottish voters had continually rejected them since 1955. That's why voting SNP in both the constituency and list votes is an appallingly bad idea, as it allows unionists to take seats the system has awarded to them. So let's roll forward to 2029, when Farage becomes the next UK Prime Minister. What will the impact be on Scotland? With a far-right politician like Farage in control at number 10, Scotland, as part of the UK, will see extreme policies Scots don't support and won't have voted for being forced on them, policies 100 times worse than anything which has gone before under the current UK system, and that's been pretty bad already for Scotland. And imagine if Farage follows Trump's example and decides he's never leaving office once elected. Expect a police or even military crackdown, as it is unlikely they will stop taking orders from him, and they are the ones who have the guns. Will he dismantle the power of the judiciary and the weak checks and balances which exist in the English-UK system, which are meant to stand up to the government when they go too far? As Scotland is already trampled on by the UK government in London and is hardly even an afterthought in Westminster policy decisions unless it involves the continual asset stripping of Scotland's huge natural resources, then we can be pretty certain that any pretense of democracy will be long gone. And the more we see of Trump, the more his playbook resembles that of pre-war Germany under Adolf Hitler in the 1930s, and Farage is a self-confessed admirer of Trump, so we'll leave you to guess which direction England and its annexed territories will be traveling in. Hitler got big industry on side at the outset with the promise to make Germany great again. Trump has got big corporations on side with his promise to make America great again, and his supporters are not only buying into that narrative, but seem oblivious to the very real dangers of what is happening, dangers alluded to with extreme statements from Trump, such as calling for the execution of the former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and characterizing his political adversaries as subhuman vermin who must be rooted out. Why did his supporters not recoil when Trump promised to unleash an authoritarian regime as president and to assume the role of dictator on day one? What explains his enduring appeal to his fan base despite making such statements? The answer may well be that politicians like Trump and Farage, backed up by support from the entitled billionaire classes, have been able to capitalize on the growing disconnect between the people and politicians that has been taking place for decades now. The 2011 to 2014 SNP administration under the late Alex Salmond was a temporary exception. This feeling of disconnect is stoked up by the far right who point the finger of blame at anyone else, such as migrants, to avoid anyone looking too closely at their real agenda. Trump has been able to create an emotional connection between himself and his supporters with words like, "I am your warrior," "I am your justice," "Make America great again," empty slogans which suggest he is on the side of the disillusioned working-class masses, when in reality, he's just using them. And that's how he creates that emotional bond where actual policies really don't matter anymore. Rather than presenting a dull list of political strategies and policies most people just get instantly bored with, Trump appeals to his supporters on a more emotional level, making them feel connected and part of his mission to make America great again. What does that mean anyway? In reality, America is being trashed at a rate not seen before as countries, especially those on the sharp end of Trump's tariffs, fight back with counter-tariffs which are already damaging U.S. trade. Canadians, angry at the 51st state pronouncements, are increasingly boycotting American goods and canceling their travel plans to their nearest neighbor, costing America billions in lost trade. But even these acts of self-harm don't appear to dampen the enthusiasm Trump's supporters have for him. And it's the same in England, only here, the message was, take back control. And with that, Brexit was won by Farage, admittedly only just in England, while Scotland rejected it outright. But who in Westminster cares what Scotland thinks? And despite Brexit costing the UK £100 billion a year in lost trade, remember Theresa May's "there's no magic money tree to pay nurses in England a living wage" quote? Farage is riding the crest of a wave in England, where Reform UK Party Limited is finding favour with voters who are looking the way the mainstream media points them to look, to find someone else to blame for their country's problems. And just like when England was allegedly taking back control from Europe, where, unlike Scotland, it had a vote and a veto, Farage is the man who will fix it all again, appealing to exactly the same empty but powerful emotional connection that Trump has successfully used in America. It's true to say that the picture is looking quite bleak, bar some miracle or sudden outbreak of common sense. With increasing disunity across Europe, would other countries with right-wing leaders fight Trump if he took Greenland by force or even invaded Canada? Perhaps not. And with Scotland's huge natural resources, might Trump look to take Scotland over, perhaps even buying it from English Prime Minister Farage so he could loot it instead of England? Would Farage be able to resist Trump even if he wanted to? Probably not. Trump is a megalomaniac, and if he begins to succeed with some of his intended acquisitions, he won't stop there. Scotland could well be next. Why? Because Trump will have noticed, just like England has, that just like Greenland, Scotland has enormous economic potential and huge natural resources. Another resource which England is going to be increasingly desperate for is clean water, in quantities that England simply cannot replicate, particularly as climate change gets worse. So any deal to sell Scotland to Trump would involve England continuing to be supplied with Scotland's water. Coupled with Scotland's energy-generating capacity, be it tidal, wind or hydro, Scotland is an economic powerhouse of the future, particularly as climate change gets worse. And then, of course, Scotland is England's nuclear weapons base, the place where, as the UK, it keeps its nuclear submarines, which, alarmingly, have failed their fit-for-purpose tests several times now. As a nation, albeit an annexed one, Scotland has consistently shown itself to be opposed to the possession of nuclear weapons and the threat of using them, yet we are forced to have a Trident base just 25 miles from the centre of our biggest city, making Scotland, not London, a massive first strike target in any nuclear war. Trump will, just like the government in England has, realize that an independent Scotland would threaten the future of these nuclear bases, so he will want to remove that threat by taking over Scotland to keep a strategic nuclear base here in perpetuity. Sounds crazy? Well, as we watch what the world's most powerful man is already saying and doing, it really isn't that crazy at all. And like Trump, Farage is incompetent too. Remember the 100 billion lost annually to the UK by Brexit? That's thousands of lost jobs, and your hard-earned tax pounds spaffed up the wall, as Boris Johnson would say. So, like Trump is doing, Farage would probably also trash Britain's economy, so selling Scotland off to the Americans to help deal with the crisis he will create at home no longer seems like such a ludicrous idea. Trump is starting to create the idea that territories can be bought, sold, or simply taken over by force. It's something Scotland needs to seriously consider, especially people in Scotland who still believe in the Union. If Trump went to Farage asking to buy Scotland, Farage will not care one bit what Scots think. He'll sell it for the right price, just as the increasingly far-right Tories and English Labour would. So, to recap, the worst-case scenario for Scotland is to remain in a union where England really doesn't care what happens to us. We are definitely not being bailed out by their overwhelming generosity, as UK-controlled mainstream media loves to tell us. Remember, in the early 70s, Britain was all but bankrupt and the biggest user of the International Monetary Fund until Scottish oil bailed England out, something which continues to this day. At least as an independent country, Farage will not be able to sell Scotland to Trump, and if Trump decided to invade, well, by then, he could be fighting wars on many fronts with various countries. And whilst America has got the biggest military in the world, it lost the Vietnam War, it was humiliated in Afghanistan, and their Iraq adventure wasn't a great success either. This is the beginning of the end for the American empire, just like the British one before it. Of course, a lot can happen between now and 2029 and the UK general election. Trump's actions, or rather those of his sidekick Elon Musk, who now appears to be the real president pulling many of Trump's strings, could not only crash the US economy, but the global one too, plunging millions of people into instant poverty. With Trump's expansionist threats, he could spark a global conflict. As for Scotland, as we've already speculated, he could decide that Scotland should be the 53rd state after Canada and Greenland. Not having a say in our future and leaving it to the country next door is not helpful in this respect, as the government in England really couldn't care less about Scotland, only our resources. So, what about the best-case scenarios? These could just be the rantings of a madman that come to nothing, although it's pretty scary that a madman has his finger on the red button. The US military might split into factions, with some refusing to carry out Trump's orders if he goes too far, leading to another American Civil War. The Democrats would do well to start forging support among the generals and the police at this point as an insurance policy against a Trump dictatorship. Maybe Trump will be impeached as he becomes more extreme. Is that even possible? And Republican support peels away from him. And who knows, maybe the voters in England will wake up to the threat posed by Farage and decide not to vote for him in 2029, even if current polling has Reform already leading other English parties. As it doesn't matter what Scots vote, Since English voters will always decide by the weight of sheer numbers, ending the union is really a very good idea for those Scots who don't want people in another country to decide their future, especially having far-right politicians imposed on them. Remember, much of the mainstream media is largely owned by entitled wealthy people who not only fund the far right, but use their influence to shape opinion in their favour and in their best interests, as happened with Brexit and the heavily biased pro-union reporting of the 2014 Scottish independence campaign, for example. That's why the Scotland Channel exists, to champion Scotland and provide an alternative to the gaslighting of mainstream media, which leads to extremists like Trump or Farage gaining power and trashing any semblance of democracy. And that's why the Scotland Channel does not have the backing GB News or Sky does. But with your support, we can continue to create independent Scottish media. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to be notified of other content from the Scotland Channel. Consider helping to shape future content by becoming a friend of the Scotland Channel. See our website for details or make a donation to the channel to help us to continue to create independent Scottish media here in Scotland. And if you love the channel, visit our shop for great Scotland Channel merch. Lastly, how likely is it that people wake up to the dangers of the far right before it's too late? Well, if history is anything to go by, not very. Thank you for watching.